Jai Baba. Welcome, everyone. Good morning. We're happy you're here. And good afternoon to those of you in France. Jai Baba. We're here today to spend some time thinking and talking about Baba's beloved Don Stevens. He's always been kind of a fascinating man for me. He's co-authored God Speaks, written Listen Humanity, and we have, fortunately, Laurent Weichberger here with us today. And he's going to be our anchor and carry us through this time. Jai Baba to you, Laurent.
Thank you, Ruthie. Can everybody hear me okay?
I think so.
Jai Baba, Jai Baba. Before I start, I'd like to go through all the attendees. There's 13 participants, so that means there's 12 other people calling in. If you could say your name and where you're calling in from, where you're sitting today. Again, I'm Laurent Weichberger. Today I'm in Vermont in the USA. Who wants to go next?
I'm Betty Lohman. I'm from Portland, Oregon.
I'm Diana Goodhart. I'm in Asheville, North Carolina.
Okay, so we are Christine and Philippe Joucla, and we are in
We're
France,
Diane.
in Brittany, in Van, in our garden at the moment. And Don came to have meetings at our place for at least 10 to 15 years.
Awesome. Later, I'm going to call upon you, Christine and Philippe, and you can tell a story about that.
We're Diane and Terry from Venice Beach, California.
Baba. I'm Ruth Appel from Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Marion Lewis from New York City.
Stuart Baker in Myrtle Beach.
Hey, Stuart.
Hey, Laurent.
Alta Burnett in Louisville, Kentucky.
Welcome, Alta.
Thank you.
Who have we not heard from? I think Chris and Ian.
This is Joy Carlson from Myrtle Beach.
Hey, Joy.
Hey, Lauren.
A few more people. Who have we not heard from? All right, well, we'll let them be anonymous if they wish. Some of us on this meeting have actually spent more time or known Don longer than I have. So I'm happy to be the facilitator. However, I would love it if after I say a few words about Don, we all share and it's a conversation. I don't want it to just be my particular perspective. I know Stuart's been with Don and Philippe and Christine have been with Don quite a bit and others. So let me say a few words and then I'll let it be a Q&A and also have people share their stories, and I'll call on people if they don't feel, like they want to just come out of their shell immediately. I can try to coax them out of their shell. So I'll say a few words. Of course, we have a beautiful photo here of beloved Baba with Don in India. This looks like the 1960s to me. It looks like maybe, early 60s. Of course, Don came to Baba in 1945. I had many conversations with him because I was permitted by Don or given the opportunity by Don to write his biography, which is now available. It's called An Almost Perfect Balance. It's available at Share Your Bookstore. Some of you have it or have read it or seen it. Worked very hard on that, and so I know probably more about Don's life than many others at this point. What he told me about his early days was that he was a Sufi in the order of Hazrat Inayat Khan. It's a very long story. I put it in the biography, so I'm not going to tell all that here. But at some point, his Murshida, who was Rabia Martin, said to him and all the others who she had gathered, all her murids, she said, listen, you know, Hazrat Inayat Khan has been passed away for quite some time, and it's my duty as the Murshida to get proper guidance for our order. And so I've put myself and this order under Meher Baba's guidance. And I will give you all 2 weeks, she said to Don and everybody who she had gathered, 2 weeks to make your decision. Should I, your decision is, should I continue under Murshid Rabia Martin and Meher Baba, or should I go my own way? That's your decision, she said. I will not tell you what to do, but you have 2 weeks to tell me your decision. And Don said to me, this was terrible. He did not like this at all. He didn't know anything about Meher Baba. He was dedicated to his Murshida, Rabia Martin. He loved her. He thought she was great. But this was a curveball at the very least. And he told me, we had many conversations about this. He said, you know, and he didn't call me Laurent, by the way, he always called me Little Bear. So he said, you know, Little Bear, there was no real literature about Meher Baba back then in 45. Almost nothing was available. Not nothing, but almost nothing. And he said, my friend Stuart Edward White, who was a well-known sort of mystical writer and adventurer type, had a copy of a book called A Search in Secret India by Paul Brunton, which Don, you know, voraciously read. There's 2 chapters in there. I read the book also. I know what it says in there. And Paul Brunton was an odd sort of character who was critical of Baba. Many people were critical of Baba, so what? But Don said reading this book by Paul Brunton didn't help him make his decision at all. It just made it worse because he found out by reading this that Meher Baba was silent. And, you know, Don was very frank and honest. And he said, you know, to me, he said, I thought that was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. If you're a spiritual master, why would you keep silent? That doesn't seem like a good idea at all. So he was critical of Baba's being silent. He couldn't get it. And then he said, you know, he didn't really know what to make of this idea of the whole order being suddenly under Meher Baba. And so he thought about it and felt about it and tried to read this and that, but there was, like he said, he was very little to read. So he went back to Murshida Martin and he said to her, can I talk to you about this? Before the 2 weeks was up, he said, can I talk to you about this? And he basically laid out his struggle. And she said, is that it, Don? And he said, well, yeah, that's basically it. And she said, well, then I have a question for you. And he said, what's that, Murshida? She said, well, Don, how can the drop measure the ocean? He said, you know, Murshida, you're right. And I don't know what the right answer is, but I know I trust you. And if you feel that going under Meher Baba's guidance is the right thing for you and for our order, I will follow you and I will trust you. But he confided in me. He did not know. It wasn't like there was a voice of God and light and drama, nothing. He just didn't know. So he put his faith in his Murshida. And as fate would have it, it was 7 years from that commitment by Don to stay in the order under Meher Baba. It was 7 years later until he met Meher Baba in 1952. And I said, wow, 7 years, Don. And he said to me, Little Bear, I needed those 7 years. And I know what he means, because that was a giant transition for his whole spiritual life to be under Meher Baba. And Murshida Martin was teaching them Meher Baba's material, but there was no God Speaks yet. So there was messages, there was like the seeds of God Speaks, but there was no God Speaks because it wasn't created yet. All right, so that's a good story. By the way, Murshida Martin did all this, dedicating herself to Meher Baba and putting her order under Meher Baba, and Baba said yes to both without ever meeting him. She died of cancer before she met Meher Baba. She had an inner experience of Baba, and she wrote to him in the letter, the correspondence and the letter from Murshida Martin to Meher Baba's in the biography and all that. So you can read all the backstory. The gist of it is that Baba and Don met in 1952, and then Don of course, had a direct relationship from 1952 till Baba's passing in 69, and then the rest of his life until 2011, of course, completely, totally dedicated to his work for Mayor Baba. I'll say one more thing, and then we can open it up for other stories and other questions. I traveled around the world with Don, helping him. He facilitated a number of different types of seminars: intuition, God Speaks, forgiveness, young people's groups, all manner of work. And one day we were traveling through, I don't know where, some airport, and I said, Don, why are we doing this? I just wanted to know what his answer would be. And he said, well, little bear, we're going about my Father's business. And again, I knew exactly what he meant. It's he saw Mayor Baba as the Christ, as the avatar. There was no doubt about it. There was not even a shadow of a doubt. And so he was a representative of God in human form. And when we would do work together, when he would sit in front of Baba lovers, he would button up his top button and wear a tie. And he would want to be presenting in a state and in a manner befitting the avatar of the age. He took it, he was serious, but also playful. He wasn't somber. He wasn't somber, but he was serious. Do you know what I mean? And so he was in earnest, and he had things to say, and he'd have a outline of what he wanted to say, and we'd get 2 points in, and an hour it would have gone by, and I say, if you want to get through the rest of those points, we got to pick up the pace, you know. So he understood that, and it was a great, incredible, great opportunity to be with him while he was working for Baba. All right. I would love to hear from anybody who has stories about Baba. I know Stuart does. I know Christine and Philippe do, but any questions or any stories, please, let's open it up. I don't want to be the one talking. Oh, my wife is here too. Come over here, Lo. Vanessa's here too. There she is. All right. So who wants to go first? Stories, questions, anything. Go ahead, Joy, go ahead. Are you on mute, Joy?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm reading the book and I love it. I'm only up to page 400 and something. Still halfway to go. One of the things that really stuck out for me, if I could read Don's answer to your question, what is it that Don Stevens
Sure.
Stevens most deeply wants? It's
Sure.
a pretty short paragraph.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, sure.
I thought it was great. Oddly enough, neither God realization nor to be rejoined with Baba. I explained above that Baba gave me a glimpse of complete oneness, and I understand fully that for that to be permanent, I must go through the discipline of wiping out samskaras. And I have no wish to slight or avoid that in any manner. And to be rejoined with Baba, that is a bit ridiculous, as again, he showed me the first day after dropping the body that he was more constantly and closely at my side than he was when his body was sitting over at Mirazad. So what I find regularly to be the most important thing to me is to live completely honestly and openly with those I love, which is quite a few people, and that I find to be not an easy bill to fill. In fact, it is a constant challenge, but I also admit a delightful challenge.
It's an incredible response. I am so glad I asked him that question.
Yeah, me too.
So, 20 years ago, I asked that question, and it took 20 years to create the biography. But when I started writing, after Don passed away, and I started in earnest writing the book, I was so glad that I had asked him so many questions and he had given so many incredible answers, because then I just had to put it all together. And had I not had the courage to ask, who knows, right? What it would have turned out. But so much of the book is Don's own words. So it's a great blessing to have it. And by the way, that paragraph is really practical spirituality if you think about it. He's not talking about self-realization or God realization. He's talking about the day-to-day, what it means to walk on the spiritual path. That is what it means. I mean, of course, everybody has their own definition, right? As there, I see there's 18 participants. So there's 18 spiritual paths right here on this Zoom. But that was Don's spiritual path, was the present moment. And it reminds me of a story. When I first started working with him in London on his biography, he would invite me over for dinner and he'd say something like, well, little bear, how do you approach Baba and spirituality? And I said, well, I try, it's not easy, but I try to, when I'm dealing with humans or any situation, to not get hung up on the ego presentation and the sanskaric presentation, but to go deeper than that and try to tune into their soul, that they're really Baba. And it could be a lot of effort to get to that place where I'm connecting with the Baba in them, but not to just stop at the ego. And he said, oh, I can never do that. And I said, oh, well, then how do you approach spirituality and Baba? And he said, okay, well, he said, I try to just show up in every situation with as much love as I can. So he kind of reduced my more complicated version of it to being as loving in every possible situation as he could. And he lived that way. So thank you for reading that, Joy. All right, who wants to go next?
I'll just make one quick comment. I did not meet Don Stevens, but my husband did. And he was new to Baba, new to the center, and he walked into the meeting place, I believe, to see something going on. And there was one seat, and he sat down next to Don Stevens. He had no idea it was Don or who Don Stevens was. He was just taken in, he said. Don just acted as if they were old friends that had just re-met. He brought so much love to that meeting for my husband as an individual.
Beautiful.
And then when he left, he turned to someone and said, who was that? And they said, oh, that's Don Stevens. So I just have to bring that because just the way my husband describes that meeting of two souls coming together like old friends. Don brought that. Thanks.
Right. And that's a testament to him living that way of bringing love to the situation, right? He didn't even have to know you to show up with love, right? There was no condition to be met, right? Beautiful, beautiful story. How about you, Stuart? You want to say a couple words?
Sure, thanks, Laurent. So I heard Don speak in Boston, I think it was 1982. And I know I had the impression this is a remarkable man. Just this unusual blending of this wonderful quiet warmth with clearly great intellect, great mental abilities, and this unusual charm I just never experienced from anybody else before. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, would you consider coming to Cape Cod for a weekend where I was living and visit us, and we'll hold a little meeting? And word got back to me after a while that he was looking forward to doing that. So he came, and he was the most delightful house guest I've ever had in my life, and charming. And so we had a small meeting. There were maybe about a dozen people. Don led the meeting, charmed everybody. And we did everything together that weekend. We did laundry together in my basement. He insisted on cooking a dinner for the small Baba community we had, just a handful of people. And we had to go around town to get exactly the ingredients that he wanted. And it was in the winter, and it happened to be quite cold. And on Saturday afternoon, he said, I'd like to see the center of your town. And I said, okay, you want to drive there? He said, well, let's walk. Can we walk? And we bundled up. Temperature was in the 20s, and we walked to the small downtown, kind of charming, and Falmouth on Cape Cod. And he had questions about it all and just took it in. But he was just the most comfortable guy. And just, I mean, you know well, Laurent, but he had these homespun expressions all the time. And I'm paraphrasing, but he'd say something like, well, gosh, no, that's just something terribly important, isn't it? And don't you think we should take a deeper look at that? And I know he had emotions, but
Yep.
he was a very tempered guy. And then when I learned later that Baba said he was an almost perfect blending of head and heart, I said, that's Don. That's
Yep.
Perfect description of him. So I loved all the time with him, and then was in New England Intuition Group with him for years. Yeah, and then I'll just mention too, my daughter spent junior year of college in Spain. This goes back a while, and she was going to make a trip to Paris, and I said, you have to look up Don Stevens. So they got together and they shared a glass of wine in a little cafe in Paris, and she had met him when she was only about 5 or 6 years old, and he was our house guest. But anyway, it's just this incredible spiritual soul and a charming human being.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those stories, Stuart. That's exactly my experience is what you're sharing. You reminded me of a couple things, so I'm going to share that. When we know that Don came to Baba in 1945, but when Baba finally came back to America after a long break of about 20 years, and he came back in 1952, Don wrote to Baba, naturally, because of this impending visit. And Don was working on the Fairfax Sufi Center in California because Baba was intending to drive across country to Fairfax to meet the Sufis. So I have the letter that Don wrote to Baba and Baba's response right before Baba arrived in America. And I've also got the letter right after they met. What's interesting about these two letters is in the first response, Baba referred to Don as his son. And in the second, after they met, Baba referred to Don as his spiritual son, similar but different. And I thought, let me check something. And I looked in the discourses. There's only one mention of the phrase spiritual son. The gist of it, I'm paraphrasing, but Baba says the gist of it is that the disciple who obeys the master 100% is the spiritual son of the master. And Baba didn't go around calling people his son and his spiritual son. That was not Baba's way of communicating. It was very, very rare. I only found one other place, and it's also in the biography, where Baba started calling people his son, and it's in the barn in 1956. And Baba was listing saints in India by name and their place. And then 4 or 5 of these saints, and he said, these are my sons. That's what he said about the saints. So Baba used this word or phrase, spiritual son or son, very, very infrequently, rarely, almost not at all. And another thing is that Don was told by Baba early on, listen, he said, you travel for your work, your oil work. And I want you to know, whenever you're anywhere near India, you do not have to write to me. You don't have to call me. You don't have to cable me. You just come. And so Baba gave Don an open door policy to just walk in on Baba. Almost, I'm not going to say nobody had that, but almost nobody had that. Of course, the Eastern Mandali, that's a different story. And very, very few others did Baba give this open door. We know that Baba was very private. Sometimes people would come from long distances and Baba wouldn't even see them. So Baba had his own way, and Don was in a very special category. Okay. I want to honor Christine and Philippe from France. Would you like to share a story or two about Don, s'il vous plaît?
Okay. Well, it's not really a story, it's just a summary. We met Don Stevens, I think it was 1987, when we were both posted as teachers in Sarthe near Le Mans. And it was at André and Gina Grimard's place. They died now. And when in the very first meeting, because I've always been a very intellectual mind person. In the very first meeting, he just answered all my questions. And we went to the different meetings one after the other that took place at the time. It was once every month. And our life seemed to enlighten with so many quick miracles of intuition straight away that, of course, we felt committed at once. We had to leave then Sarthe we moved to Vannes, Brittany in 1991. And first I made sorry, I'm emotional. I wanted to make the trip myself to go back there to the meetings, but I had my third daughter at the time. She was a baby, and it was a long journey for me. And Don insisted on coming to our place straight away. So I didn't want to, because I said, Don, I don't want to burden you. And he said, never, you are my family. Well, I know he said that to many people, but so it was such a gift. So then he came to our house once a month. It was on his calendar. We knew that he was, going to, in France, Paris, the South, Le Mans, Vannes, to England, then to the United States. So he made sure that he always came to Vannes, and so we attended his meetings. And as you say, and everyone knows, it was such a good balance between hearts, being so warm, open-hearted, knowing us straight away, but never any judgment, very good advice. Even once, to me, used slang words because I said, Don, I don't feel like I should ask for Baba's help. That's selfish, I said. And Don answered straight away to me, Christine, that's bullshit. So I think he said that not because he wanted to use slang, but because he knew that to me it would impress me as a very strong expression. And just to insist on how he was close to us. He came to my concerts too, because I'm a musician too. And that's why it shows me singing on one of the films. And Philip can talk about the work you did with Don about the film.
I spent so much time with Don editing films and videos he wanted from the pilgrimage in India, and also a long time before. And he was so patient. I had such poor, hardware, video recorder, the software I use on Windows, it would crash. I would have to restart the computer. And he felt so patient. I was sick, so he was so patient. I thought, I'm wasting his time. And he said, oh, it's okay. And I knew he wanted everything to be perfect. He had everything planned in his head. And I said, well, I don't have to think. He knows exactly what he's doing, and it will take time. But and he was so amazing, so nice to
Yes.
me, and he was spent so much time thanking me for all the time. I said, no, that's
And that's
I
why
have to
you
thank you.
edited his films.
I edited, yeah, his films. I have it with very poor, hardware. Stuff I used was very bad quality at the time, but it worked, and he was pleased. So
It was in VHS at the
yeah,
time.
VHS and
Yeah.
tapes and
And then
horrible.
Philip digitized everything. That is sent to the group, the Beats group in London. So I
Yeah.
guess you have them
Whoever asked,
too.
Yep.
Yes.
but
Yeah, now
mo-
now it's the Beads on One String USA. They have all them.
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
thank you.
Okay. And yes, so just to sum up, it's difficult to say, but he was really a spiritual father to me, to us, spiritual guide, of course. And several times I said to him, Don, I'm sorry, but you're more important to me than Baba. So
That's a big one.
He didn't want me to say that. He was, of course, modest, but
Yeah.
he let me say it.
Well, he had that humility. Don was extremely
Yes.
humble.
Yes, extremely. And of course, he liked food, so I cooked for him each time he came, and he had his little glass of wine and everything. And then when we went to the pilgrimage in India, the first pilgrimage with you, we met you in 2004. In 2004, that was such an experience. And I mean, during the meetings, as he did everywhere, I guess we studied chapters of the discourses and all the different virtues, like mainly honesty, and later, of course, intuition. And he came to us until 2009. That is to say, just before he had his accident and he couldn't move anymore. And when he got on the train, he had a wheelchair ordered from the train to the platform and everything. So that, I mean, how can I say how thankful we are? And
He worked until his last day, until his very last day. He worked for Baba
until the end. Yes.
Yep. Christine, can you do one thing for me, s'il vous plaît?
Yes.
This is being recorded, so for the future, if anybody from the French group is ever listening, can you say a few words about Don en français?
En français. Je répète, you want me to repeat? Or?
Not maybe everything.
Just a few words about Don in French.
Don était pour nous un père spirituel, évidemment un guide spirituel qui nous a conduits vers Baba, mais il était à la fois donc tellement ouvert de cœur, tellement chaleureux, tellement proche de chacun de nous, de mes enfants, de ma famille, des amis qui venaient. Il s'intéressait à chacun de nous, aussi bien qu'on nous étions vraiment tous très, très proches. Donc, il était à la fois ce cœur grand ouvert, toujours modeste, et aussi, il avait cette capacité, même en français, d'expliquer les vertus de Mère Baba, enfin les vertus de l'honnêteté, de parler des discours. I'm just explaining in English for you. The fact that he spoke French all the time when he came at home.
Right.
That was,
Thank you so much.
That was a difficulty for him. So voilà. Donc c'était vraiment un merveilleux cadeau.
Très bien. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Anybody else stories or questions for me? I see my old friend Marilyn from New York. Anybody else? Let's open it up. Chris and Ian.
Did Janet raise her hand?
I don't know. I don't see any hands raised.
Well, I mean, I think she raised.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't meet Don until 2000, the year 2000, but before Laurent and before Seven, there was the Three Musketeers. And my husband was one of those guys. And I don't know if it was that Don was getting older and he really needed somebody to travel with him, but he definitely wanted that. And I also realized he also wanted to mix up the people that were on the East Coast with the West Coast, with the going to Mexico and doing this. So he wanted his companions in different places to know each other. But the three musketeers were Gary Miller met Don somehow in Myrtle Beach. And then he came back home and told Neil Lundgren. And then Tom Hickey, my husband, was the third musketeer. He's from Iowa, but they would be in Myrtle Beach and different things. And Don would want, I know Tom went with Don to Los Angeles. He drove to Los Angeles to be with Don. And then another time he went to LA and then flew to Mexico City with him. And there are all kinds of fun little stories, but I didn't meet him. I was taking care of Tom's mother. So I was home with a 99-year-old lady. So I didn't meet him until 2000 when he was meeting at in St. Paul at Marge Laurent. I don't remember what her name was. She was a healer.
Marge Shukoff. Marge Shukoff.
Okay. She was in the intuition group.
Yep.
And I met I met Don finally, and Tom introduced me, and he just, when he found out my name was Janet, his eyes just lit up and said, "Oh, I won't have any trouble remembering that name. That was my first girlfriend." And
that's right.
It wasn't until Neil sent us your book, Laurent, and I just saw that his first girlfriend was when he was 3 years old, and that he actually went under the crawl space. She was a few years older, so she was already in school. He went under the crawl space so he could sit right beneath her. And I just thought, wow, that is so the way Don was as far as connection. He was really from early on so into connecting with reality. But I mean, the big love, not a little girl, but the big love.
Well, it was a good start.
Yeah, that was pretty.
Good to see you, Janet. And
Yeah.
by the way, when she says into the crawl space, so it was a one-room schoolhouse in Imlay, Nevada, and Don figured out where her desk would be, so he crawled underneath the floorboards and underneath the school, so he could sit right beneath Janet, his girlfriend. She was above the floor and he was below the floor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Janet. Jay Baba. I see Jill Davis has a hand up. Go ahead, Jill.
Hi, sorry to not show my picture. I actually just woke up. And Laurent, there's been something that's been bothering me ever since I sent you the material I did. And so I'd like to take a couple of minutes to salve my conscience here, if that's okay.
You can do whatever you want, my sister. Go ahead, Jay Baba.
Yeah, so first of all, I remember Baba saying about Don that there was nobody like him. I mean, to meet a man like him in the West, that there just was nobody else like him. And I always had wanted to meet him, and finally did in 2003. And it was, it's too long of a story to tell that, but I've been through a family crisis that had really debilitated my health. And I was having panic attacks. And I was in London, and somebody told Don in the south of France. And so they had me call him. And a doctor had told me I needed several months in a garden. And I couldn't go home to get those months because the crisis was still going on. So Don invited me to the south of France, and he and Claude arranged that I could use an apartment they had for rent, but it was the slow season and they could give it to me, you know, on a sliding scale. And that's how I met him. I don't know what they thought. You know, I arrived in my nun outfit of a black skirt and white top with my Laura Ashley flowered suitcases sitting on the train station when they picked me up in Antibes in a convertible. And the first thing I noticed was Claude's beautiful convertible. I believe it was silver, and the top was down, and just the joy of the south of France that Don was obviously fully enjoying. And so the first thing I noticed was his ability to be completely with Baba and yet thoroughly enjoy the moment of life and the charm of everything. And that the artistry of his character, you know, he's a wonderful pianist. I mean, his character, I think the artistry of his character is like that of, you know, the great artists, you know, Giotto or Da Vinci or Matisse or any of those. And he just was he was such a joy to be with because of that poise and artistry, and everything was enhanced. But my conscience is bothering me because I did run into a major problem with him, and it never disrupted being able to spend time with him. Even I believe the last time I saw him was on my way back from India in 2003 when I, you know, visited with him in Hammersmith. And I would always try to see him if I was staying in London or in Paris on my way back from India. And he was always there and always very steady. But on that first visit to the south of France, what happened is that Meru was coming through Europe. And I was so excited she was going to come to the south of France. And then Don and Claude canceled the visit. And I remember 3 times I brought it up with Don because I just had this really strong feeling that that they're canceling the visit, well, it was a personal disappointment. And so I was definitely, the first thing he'd done that I was in energetic opposition to it. And I told him, and I tried to tell him diplomatically, but he just wouldn't hear it. And he said that they canceled the visit because Meru needed to have also Kristen paid for, and that she couldn't visit alone. And Don questioned, you know, why couldn't she come to the south of France by herself? Why did she always need to travel with someone? And that they didn't feel comfortable paying for 2 of them. So on a financial basis, it might be, that may have been the real reason that their funds weren't just quite there. On the other hand, that he didn't understand why Meru couldn't travel alone. The way I saw it was, well, Meru was on Mayor Baba's new life. She certainly knows what Mayor Baba would wish or wouldn't wish, and that she would never, ever want to take any money unnecessarily, so that if she needed to travel with someone, one had to absolutely understand that for her, this was Baba's wish and will, and accept it as an authority that maybe was a little bit more than Dawn's, since she was actually on the new life and she lived with Baba her whole life, more or less. And so we had a great difference of opinion there. However, you know, after 3 tries, I gave up and I continued to just, you know, concentrate on, I mean, people can be, that's when I began to realize, you know, people don't have to be perfect to be with Baba and to be great, great souls. And that I needed to learn a little bit more detachment, even with Dawn.
Yep.
And Dawn was teaching me detachment with my family, you know, because sometimes my sister would call and I'd have to use Dawn's phone, and he would notice how I'd lose my poise with her. And so Don himself was teaching me the very discrimination and detachment that this difference over Meru had brought up. And I didn't bring it up with Meru in India. It came up of itself when I was alone with her one time on the porch. And I think she brought it up somehow. And she said that Mayor Baba had actually told her to never travel alone. And so that was why it had to be that way. She also made it very clear that she wanted me to detach from Dawn and not, and this is not to say that others that are, you know, just were really strictly with him more than I was, needed to detach. This was a personal thing. This was a lesson I needed to learn. And it was a huge lesson because Don himself, one of the things he's wanted us to understand is to be able to deal honestly with other people, and the fact that nobody's perfect and there are going to be troubles that come up.
Sure.
And to learn how to deal with them. And so, I mean, Don and I there was never any split or division in the steadiness of his, just being one of the people whom he was there for. I could call him anytime. I could call, if I was in London, I could call and he'd set up a visit. You know, I stayed.
Well, thank you.
So anyway,
thank you so much, Jill. That was a great story. Thank you for sharing that. I do want to give other people a chance also.
There's one other little thing I need to say, and this is about Alon Yule. And I haven't told Alon I was going to tell you this, but I do want to say that Alon was cleared of all the charges against him. And it was a legal clearance. And I just wanted to mention that because
thank you.
That's really important.
Thank you so much.
And it's easy that you wouldn't have known that. So,
No, thank you for sharing that.
Okay.
Jay Baba. Jay Baba. Who would like to go next? We have about 15 minutes-ish. Questions? Do you have any questions, or anybody want to tell a story of their experience of Don? Happy to answer questions.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Hi, Laurent.
Hey, how are you?
Really well. So, Laurent, what was it about Don Stevens that drew you to him? Because you have devoted so much of your life and your studies to him. What did he speak to you in your heart?
Well, not just my heart, my mind too. Let's do the balancing act.
Okay.
Mind and heart. That's a great question. Thank you for asking. So, you know, I'd read Listen Humanity before meeting Don or having any personal interaction with him. He always seemed to be larger than life, you know, as I came to Baba when I was 17 years old. So he seemed somewhat out of reach for somebody like me. But when I finally did reach out to him, he was immediately responsive and humble and kind. And I think the main, if I could say, the main draw or resonance had to do with the fact that I studied chemistry and I was actually an atheist before coming to Baba. And Don studied chemistry also. And then I became involved with my computer science career. And so I was trying to integrate the practical and the spiritual by using my technological experience and aptitude while walking a spiritual life with Baba. And Don was doing exactly the same thing, where he went from being an organic chemist in college at Johns Hopkins University to then being a chemist at Standard Oil of California, which became Chevron Oil. And his whole career was one of science and technology, albeit at a oil company. And he had gone to Baba feeling bad about being in this oil job when Baba and the Mandali were doing such spiritual work and living such a spiritual life. And he said to Baba, you know, I think I should leave the oil job and embrace a more spiritual job, like, you know, social work or something. He felt that would be more fitting to a disciple of Meher Baba, and Baba wasn't hearing it at all. And then eventually Baba said, well, who do you think, Don, who do you think put you in that job at Chevron Oil? And he said, right, I did, because it's the perfect environment for you to work out the impressions and the karma that you have in this lifetime. And Baba didn't want him to abandon that at all. In fact, he did the opposite. He said, now what I want you to do is, in your oil work, I want you to be 100% honest. And of course, at the time, big oil had a bad name as being evil and all this other stuff. So Don, he said, you know, he told me, he said, you know, we made multi-million-dollar oil deals back then on a handshake. It wasn't all these lawyers and documents and agreements. We were doing business because we knew each other. We had relationships with other businessmen, and we trusted one another, and it was your honor, you know. And he said there was one case where my boss came to me and said, well, Don, we've got a problem. And there was a mistake that Chevron had made. And it was a very costly multi-million-dollar mistake. And Don's boss wanted to know how they should handle the mistake. And Don said, well, he thought about his commitment to Baba to remain honest at work in the oil industry and all that. And he said, well, I think we should admit the mistake. And his boss said, well, that'll cost us millions of dollars, Don. And Don said, yes, I know. I still think we should admit it and take the hit. And Don's boss looked at him and said, I agree with you, Don. And so together they took that hit, and it was obviously uncomfortable and damaging to Don and his boss's reputation, because they had made a mistake, and people make mistakes. But when you're in big oil, the mistakes are bigger. You know, you add a couple zeros on those mistakes. And so after that, when Don was with Baba again, Baba said, Don, does your boss at Chevron allow you to be 100% honest at work? And Don thought of that story and he said, yes, Baba. And so Don was living in a very Sufi way. This is also a Sufi type of path, living the practical spirituality of day-to-day spirituality in a very worldly job, where he was flying around the world, being wined and dined, all kinds of experiences of the world, and every day bringing that spirituality to it. So I think that when I realized all that through various different things that I had read and conversations with Don, my resonance with him only grew. It didn't get less. We had intellectual conversations, we had spiritual conversations, we wrote together. He wanted to do more and more with me, not less and less with me. So a number of books came out while we were working together. There's a whole list of them. And then, of course, working on his biography was just a complete joy. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my answer.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for asking.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that. Well, we have a few more minutes, and then I think at the top of the hour, we're going to be turning it over to the next meeting. But any other questions or stories about Don? Feel free, don't be shy. Anyone? Chris Barker, can I count on you for question or story?
Yep.
You're on mute. You're on mute. Oh, there you go.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I've got a question for you. In the last 5 minutes here, could you tell me Don's top 3 tips for developing intuition in your life, or tuning into your intuition?
That's a very, very funny one. You want to know why that's so funny to me, Chris?
Okay. Why?
The first time I met Don was because he invited me from Arizona, where I was living, to Myrtle Beach to listen to a group of people he had hand-picked, selected, to write a book called Mayor Baba's Gift of Intuition about these subjects about intuition.
Yeah, I had an intuition about that.
Yep. And he said to me, Little Bear, you cannot, if you come, he said, you cannot speak, but you can listen or audit and hear what we're working on, because all the chapters have been assigned and we're going to be having work sessions to go through the chapters with the authors reading and getting feedback. And we're trying to wrap up this book project and publish this book about Mayor Baba and intuition. Would you be interested in coming to that? And I said, well, you bet I'd be willing to, happy and willing to come to that. So I drove from Flagstaff, Arizona, 2,500 miles with my family to the Mayor Baba Center and sat in on these meetings day after day. I think, Stuart, you were there. And every day, I didn't say a word. Every day I'd take notes. And at the end of the sessions, which were hours long, about 5 o'clock, he'd say, well, would you like to come back to my cabin? And Claude's going to be making dinner and we could talk about your experience of these conversations around these chapters. I said, sure. So I came to the cabin. I think they were at the Laurel Oak. And he said, well, what did you think about all that? And I said, well, I have tons of notes because I wasn't allowed to speak. So I just took a lot of notes about my thoughts and feelings. Would you like to hear that? And he said, sure. So I'd share, you know, my daily notes of thoughts and feelings. And he thought that was great. This went on about 3 days. And on the third day, so same pattern day after day. On the third day, he announced to the group, without even asking, he didn't ask me, he just said that I would be writing a chapter with Jack Small, and I heard about it at the same time as the whole group, about what you just said, Chris, which was, how do you develop your intuition? And he titled the chapter Resources for Developing Intuition or something like that. And I hated the title of the chapter. I just hated it because I didn't relate to it at all as that's how you do things. But it was an incredible journey. And I did write the chapter with Jack Small, and it helped me understand that it's not like that. One doesn't try to develop your intuition. That's not how it works. And over the last, you know, I have what I put in the chapter that stands, you can read that, but over the last 20 something years since that happened, I would say that when one focuses oneself one-pointedly and wholeheartedly on beloved Baba through love, obedience, and surrender, that itself, although not directly interested in intuition, the process of loving Baba, obeying Baba, and surrendering to Baba itself develops the intuition, because it's the connection of heart to heart, the aspirant's heart to the divine heart of the beloved, which creates the reciprocal flow and the channel of love and grace, which is the intuitive flow. And that is all within. It's all within. There's no lover and beloved. The beloved is not outside of oneself. The beloved is within the heart. So it's the reciprocal flow of love and grace within one's own heart with the beloved, which is the intuitive voice. But focusing on the intuitive voice is not the way. It's loving Baba that's the way. And when one hears the intuitive voice, then honoring it as beloved Baba, obeying it to the best of one's ability, and trusting it. That's how one proceeds with intuition. Thank you for asking the question. I hope that was what you were asking.
Great, thank you.
Marion Lewis has her hand up. She's been patient.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Is there time for that?
Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead.
Okay, I didn't go on camera because I had a scratch on my eye and had to put medication and have a patch. And I didn't
Okay.
want to be like Marion the pirate. So
Okay.
I stayed off camera. But Don, I got to meet him a number of times when he would, always in New York City. And whenever he'd come in and he'd come to Mayor Baba House and meetings and we got to be together. But then we'd also meet down at the Sufi Center downtown and where he always loved going. And so those gatherings were always very personal and wonderful being together. And then I had the opportunity, so he was just a remarkable. I have nothing to add except just I'm so grateful. And then he came in and he was staying with someone, you know, where he was stayed for a few weeks or whatever. And I got invited up on a Sunday afternoon. It was just the three of us, the host and Don and me. And I got to spend a whole afternoon, the three of us together. And I'll just never forget it. And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. So that's about it. And very happy you did this today because got to know the being, the man, and the holy man and the human man. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. He was all of that and more. If you'd like to know more about it, please ask Share Your Books. They have a copy of An Almost Perfect Balance. Took 20 years to create. He wanted it to be created for the specific purpose of Beloved Baba. He had no interest in his own story. He was interested in how it could help Baba's work. And that's the letter about that is it's at the front of the biography. Is his letter about why the biography and why he wanted me to do it. So I hope you will enjoy that book.
Is that new?
Brand new, yes, it just
Okay,
came out.
Okay, I'll get that. Thank you. Thank you.
Just call Share Your Books and say, do you have an almost perfect balance? And they'll say, yes, we do.
And I'll get it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody. Avatar Mayor Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Mayor Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Mayor Baba Ki Jai.
Jai Baba, Laurent. Thank you.
Jai Baba.
That's beautiful.
Thank you, Laurent.
Thank you, Laurent.
Thank you, everybody. Jai Baba.